The chamber of the Galactic Council reeked of arrogance. Every species with a seat at the grand, crescent-shaped table thought themselves superior, more evolved, more refined, more civilized than the young upstart race that had clawed its way into the stars. Humanity had been allowed in only as observers, tolerated rather than respected, dismissed rather than heard. To them, Earth was nothing but a noisy planet of primitives still bleeding from their own wars, still fumbling with technology others had mastered for millennia. I sat behind our delegation's stand, a soldier-turned representative, jaw tight, hands curled into fists under the polished desk. Their words weren't even veiled anymore. "Humans," hissed the Arkari delegate, his scaled lips curling. "Unstable, violent, incapable of true diplomacy. They bring nothing but chaos to our council." A wave of murmurs spread across the chamber, soft clicks, hums, and guttural tones of approval. Some delegates laughed outright, their mocking gestures carrying just as much sting as their words. Another voice joined in, a tall, feathered envoy from the Altheri. Their homeworld is a tinderbox of greed and war, and yet they expect equality among us? A dangerous thought. I glanced at the human chair, our appointed diplomat, an old man far too cautious for his own good. He sat stiff, his lips trembling, as though afraid to breathe wrong before these alien lords. The Council's decision was clear before the vote even began. Humanity's proposal for equal defense rights within the Galactic Accord wasn't just rejected, it was mocked. The speaker, a towering creature of light and shifting energy, sealed it with cold words. "Let the record show. Humanity shall remain under observation, without military privileges, without expansion rights. Should they attempt to militarize beyond their quota, sanctions shall be imposed. This matter is closed." Closed. Just like that. Our request for recognition denied. Our existence treated like a nuisance. I felt the heat rise in my chest, a slow burn that I had carried since my days in uniform. When I saw friends die on colonies no council fleet ever came to protect. We bled alone. We built alone. And now they wanted us weak, kneeling, and forever begging at their table. When the session adjourned, the old man beside me whispered, "Best to let it go, son." "We cannot afford war." But war had already been chosen. By them. By every sneer, every dismissal, every denial. They thought humanity's temper was a weakness. They had no idea it was the spark that forged steel. That night, aboard the delegation ship orbiting the Council's station, I spoke with the men and women who mattered. Not diplomats, but commanders. Veterans. People who knew what it meant to fight without anyone's help. The air in the chamber buzzed with the low hum of anger. The kind that could either poison or empower. "They will never give us respect," one general growled, "not unless we carve it into their memory with fire." "Careful," another warned. "Their fleets outnumber ours 100-1. Their technology." I cut him off. "Outnumbers us? Yes. Outguns us? Yes. But what they don't understand, what they've never understood, is that humans don't fight wars to maintain balance. We fight because we refuse to kneel, and when we fight, we don't stop until one side is ashes." Silence followed. Heavy, deliberate. Then, slowly, grim smiles spread. It wasn't madness, it was inevitability. We began planning in secret. Ships were recalled, factories retooled, colonies armed. Earth itself transformed from a divided world into a war machine united by humiliation. News spread like wildfire. Clips of the Council's insults, their jeering, their decree of weakness. For once, the endless fractures of humanity aligned under a single banner. Never again. The Council thought their declaration ended the matter. What it had done was light the fuse. Humanity would no longer ask for respect. We would take it, in the only language the galaxy truly understood: war. And as I stared out of the viewport, watching the Council's glittering station shrink into the void, one thought burned hotter than any star. They will learn what it means to underestimate us. The alarms of preparation echoed louder than any Council decree. Earth, once fractured by politics and endless disputes, had found something stronger than its divisions: humiliation. The footage of the Council's sneers and dismissals wasn't suppressed. It was broadcast across every colony, every station, every home on Earth. People who had never agreed on a single leader suddenly agreed on one thing: no alien would ever decide humanity's fate again. Factories that had once built cars and civilian freighters now roared with the forging of warships. Cities that had been drowning in apathy became engines of steel and fire. The banners of nations blurred, and the only flag that mattered was the one of Earth itself. I spent those first weeks in the underground chambers of the Terran Defense Council, the war council born out of insult. Old generals who had once despised one another now sat shoulder to shoulder. Admirals whose fleets had never cooperated now traded plans like brothers. And men like me, men scarred, hardened, not bred for politics but for war, were dragged from retirement and silence into the heart of strategy. We studied every weakness of the alien fleets. The Council's arrogance had left cracks, and arrogance always does. Their patrols were predictable, their communication bloated with ceremony, their technology advanced but fragile in the hands of those who had forgotten what real war was. For centuries, peace had made them complacent. They didn't know how to fight an enemy that didn't play by their rules. "Hit and fade," one admiral said, stabbing the holomap. "Their ships are bigger, slower. We cut supply lines, ambush convoys, bleed them until their numbers mean nothing." "Sabotage," a general muttered. "Their stations run on networks we can infiltrate." "Humans adapt faster than any AI they've built." "And morale," I said. All eyes turned. I leaned forward, voice sharp. "The Council thrives on unity, but unity built on fear and pride. Break that, and they collapse. Show them a species they mocked turning victories against them, and they'll fracture. They'll start pointing claws and talons at each other instead of at us." The room went still, and then, slowly, they nodded. But preparation wasn't without cost. Earth had to become a war machine. And that meant rationing, conscription, sacrifice. Factories pulled fathers from their homes. Young men and women who had dreamed of exploration found themselves pressed into uniforms. For every family that cheered vengeance, another cursed the Council for dragging them into a war they hadn't chosen. Still, the anger burned hotter. The First Fleet rolled out within months, black steel monsters bristling with rail cannons and missile bays. We didn't have their elegant plasma weapons or their shimmering shields, but what we built was brutal, efficient, and designed to kill. Our ships weren't monuments of pride. They were predators. I was placed aboard the Resolute, a battleship fresh from the Luna shipyards. Its corridors smelled of welding sparks and sweat, not the polished sterility of alien craft. Its crew wasn't bred for service like the soldiers of the other species. They were miners, farmers, students, men who had lived through hardship and were now sharpened into warriors. They looked at me with eyes that carried something dangerous. Faith. They believed humanity's rage could carry them through anything. And I, despite my doubts, couldn't extinguish that fire. The Council noticed, of course. Their spies reported mass mobilization. Their drones caught glimpses of fleets forming in Sol. At first, they laughed it off. "Primitive posturing," the reports said. A tantrum from a child denied its toy. But then, the first convoy fell. A Council trade route, guarded by light frigates, ambushed by a ragged wing of Terran destroyers. The battle lasted 12 minutes. The wreckage drifted for days. Not a single human ship was captured intact. Our crews detonated cores before surrendering, denying the Council the prize of prisoners. It was a message, and one they could not ignore. I remember the moment the footage came through on the Resolute. The crew watched in silence as the alien frigates burst into fire, one after another, against the relentless onslaught of ships smaller, dirtier, but infinitely more ruthless. Cheers erupted, but I didn't smile. I knew what came next. The Council panicked. For centuries, their fleets had patrolled the stars unchallenged. They weren't used to rebellion, especially not from a race they considered beneath them. Emergency meetings were called, filled with shrieking voices and desperate blame. Some demanded humanity's immediate annihilation, others cautioned restraint, insisting this was a flare of aggression that would burn out quickly. The speaker tried to calm them with his glowing words of order, but cracks had already begun. The Cathari demanded sanctions. The Altheri wanted fleets dispatched to blockade Sol. The Arkari wanted blood. Yet, for all their fury, they argued more than they acted. Each feared committing too much, losing too many, revealing weakness before their rivals. And so, while they debated, we struck again. This time, not a convoy, a listening post on the edge of Council space. Human Marines stormed its decks, cutting down guards with ruthless precision. They didn't occupy it. They stripped it, detonated it, left it a burning carcass. The galaxy trembled. By the time the Council declared emergency war measures, it was already too late. Humanity wasn't just fighting. We were winning. Not in size, not in open battle, but in spirit. Every small victory was broadcast back to Earth, and each one lit another fire in our people. The Council tried propaganda, calling us terrorists, barbarians, lunatics. It only fueled us further. For every word they spat, we carved another scar across their fleets. But even as victories piled, I felt the weight of what was coming. Skirmishes could only last so long. Eventually they would rally, gather their massive armadas, and descend on us with overwhelming force. I spent nights in the war room, staring at star maps, listening to the hum of engines through steel walls. My crew trusted me. My commanders expected me to lead, but in the silence, doubt clawed. Could we really face them head-on? Could raw fury outweigh centuries of dominance? One evening, as the ship drifted in the quiet of interstellar dark, I walked the lower decks. Young recruits polished rifles, others checked armor seals. They weren't soldiers. They were boys pretending to be unbreakable, men hiding fear behind clenched jaws. One, barely 20, stopped me. "Sir," he said, voice trembling, "do you think we'll win?" His eyes weren't mocking, weren't hopeful. They were desperate. He needed to believe the blood he'd spill wouldn't be wasted. I stared at him, the weight of truth heavy on my tongue. I could have told him no. I could have admitted the odds. But I saw in him what I saw in all of us, a spark that refused to die. "We won't win by their rules," I said finally. "But yes, we'll win, because they've forgotten what it means to bleed for survival. We haven't, and that's why they should fear us." He nodded, holding on to my words like armor. The first major strike came soon after. The Council had dispatched a fleet, a true fleet, not patrols or convoys, to crush the rebellion. 50 warships, bristling with alien might, moving toward the human colony of Vega 7. A show of force, meant to scare us back into submission. Instead, we met them head-on. The Resolute was part of the vanguard. We emerged from warp into a sea of enemy fire, their glowing weapons cutting through the dark. Our shields flared, our hull screamed, but we didn't turn back. Torpedoes roared from our bays, railguns thundered, and human ships darted like wolves, smaller but faster, biting at the heels of giants. The battle lasted hours. We lost ships, too many, But so did they. For every Terran vessel shattered, 3 Council ships fell, crippled by tactics they couldn't comprehend. We rammed, we sabotaged, we fought like demons tearing at gods. When the smoke cleared, Vega 7 still stood, and the Council fleet limped away in disgrace. News of the battle spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers began. The humans had stood against the Council and bloodied them. Some races mocked it as luck. Others began to doubt the Council's invincibility, and for the first time, the Council was truly afraid. I stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the wreckage floating in the void. My crew cheered, but I only felt the cold certainty settle deeper. This was no longer about recognition, no longer about pride. This was war, and it would not end until one side was broken beyond repair. The victory at Vega 7 shook the galaxy like a thunderclap. For the first time in centuries, the Council's fleets had been forced to retreat. To them, it wasn't just a defeat. It was humiliation, carved into their reputation before every watching species. But humiliation breeds more than rage. It breeds paranoia, and paranoia tears at alliances. Reports came in daily of fractures inside the Council. Delegates who had once spoken in a single voice now screamed over each other. The Cathari accused the Altheri of withholding ships. The Altheri accused the Arcari of sending fleets too late. Smaller species, terrified of being dragged into a war, began to question whether the Council's rule was worth the price. The speaker tried to hold them together, his voice resonating like thunder, but even his shimmering presence couldn't hide the cracks. And I knew. Those cracks were our greatest weapon. Back on the Resolute, our war room had grown crowded with intercepted transmissions, stolen intelligence, and whispers from within the Council itself. Not all species had been blind to the Council's arrogance. Some, though still officially allied, had begun to feed us information in secret. One night, deep in the dim glow of the bridge, my intelligence officer laid a datapad before me. "Sir, this came from a relay near the Altheri border." The message was short, encoded, desperate. "They plan to cut you off, to blockade Sol, but not all of us agree. Some want you to bleed the Arcari. We will look the other way." I leaned back, the words sinking in. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't friendship. It was weakness, and weakness was just as useful. "They're turning on each other," I muttered. My second in command, a scarred veteran named Holt, gave a grim smile. "Council's nothing but predators pretending to be civilized. The second they smell blood, they'll eat each other alive. We just gave them the scent." But we couldn't rely on whispers alone. Humanity's survival demanded more than hope. It demanded offense. The Terran Defense Council had convened after Vega 7, and I was there when the decision was made. "Victory has bought us time," one admiral said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But time is not infinite. They'll come again, stronger. If we sit and wait, they'll drown us in numbers." "Then we take the fight to them," I said. My voice echoed in the chamber, louder than I intended. Dozens of eyes turned. "We've been reacting, hitting convoys, holding colonies. That ends now. We choose the battlefield, we strike their borders, make them bleed where they think they're untouchable." The room was silent for a moment, then filled with murmurs. Some agreed, others hissed about risk. But in the end, the anger in their voices matched my own. The Council wanted us contained, kept on our knees. We would not wait for chains. The first offensive campaign was drawn, Operation Iron Fang. Our target wasn't a fleet or a colony. It was something more symbolic, the Arcari supply station at Norak Prime, deep within their border. A fortress world, bristling with defenses, considered untouchable. But if we took it, if humans, the primitives, stormed their jewel, then the galaxy would never again believe in the Council's invincibility. Preparation was brutal. Fleets stretched thin, fuel rationed, every spare ton of steel welded into the ships that would make the run. The men and women aboard the Resolute knew what it meant. Many wouldn't return, and yet not a single one faltered. I walked the decks before departure, my boots echoing through narrow halls. Recruits sharpened knives, not for utility but for ritual. Veterans strapped on armor with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. Eyes followed me as I passed, and I saw it again. That dangerous faith. On the eve of departure, I stood before the crew in the hangar. Hundreds of faces, lit by harsh floodlights, stared back. "They call us savages," I said, my voice carrying against the steel. "They call us unstable, violent, incapable of diplomacy. And maybe they're right. Maybe we are violent. But that's why we're still here. That's why Earth still stands while empires fall into dust. We fight because we must. And now, we fight because we choose. Tomorrow we march into their space, into their pride, and we show them exactly what humanity is." The roar that followed shook the deck. When the fleet jumped, I felt the weight of every soul behind me. Dozens of ships, dark and brutal, tearing across the void toward enemy soil. The assault on Norak Prime began before dawn in local time. The station rose from the planet's surface like a jagged crown, guns bristling, defenses layered. To most, it was impregnable. To us, it was a challenge. Our ships hit their orbital fleets first. The Council forces fought like they always did, disciplined, measured, predictable. But war is never predictable. Not to humans. We swarmed them. Smaller ships weaving through their formation, hammering engines, detonating fuel lines. Where they tried to hold formation, we broke them apart. Where they tried to defend, we rammed. The Resolute led the charge, railguns roaring, tearing holes through ships 3 times our size. Sparks rained across the bridge, alarms screamed, but we pressed on. Every impact felt like a hammer in my chest, but I kept my eyes fixed on the station. "Target their shield generators," I ordered. Missiles streaked through space, slamming into the generators along the station's outer rim. One by one, they collapsed, and the station's defenses faltered. Dropships screamed from our bays, plunging into atmosphere, carrying Marines who knew they were storming hell. Ours blurred into fire and steel. Human boots slammed onto alien soil, rifles cutting through Arkari defenders in brutal close quarters. The air was thick with smoke and blood. Reports came in, losses heavy, but ground taken. By the time we breached the command spire, the Arkari commander stood defiant, his scaled form towering. He snarled curses about savages, about humanity's inevitable fall. I looked him in the eyes before my men cut him down. "You should have left us alone." When the spire fell, Norak Prime fell with it. For the first time, a Council stronghold had been taken not by rebellion, not by subterfuge, but by brute human force. The message was undeniable. News spread across the stars faster than fire through dry grass. Humanity had struck at the heart of the Council, and won. For the smaller species under their heel, it was proof the giants could bleed. For the Council itself, it was terror. I watched the aftermath from orbit, the planet below still burning. The crew around me celebrated, their cheers echoing through the ship. But I felt the weight of it all heavier than ever. Every victory brought retaliation closer. Every step forward made the coming storm darker. Holt joined me at the viewport, arms crossed. "We've lit the galaxy on fire, Commander. The Council won't sit idle after this." I nodded slowly. "Good. Let them come. The more they rage, the more they'll tear each other apart. All we need is to survive long enough for their unity to break." "Survive," Holt repeated with a grim laugh. "That's always been our talent, hasn't it?" "Yes. Survival. Humanity's oldest weapon. And now, the galaxy was about to learn just how sharp it had become. The fall of Norak Prime was the spark that set the galaxy ablaze. Humanity had done the unthinkable, taken a council stronghold, killed its commander, and left its fortress in ruins. For the first time in living memory, the mighty alliance of species looked vulnerable. But victory always carries its shadow, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the council struck back. The retaliation didn't come as whispers or warnings. It came as fire. Only 2 weeks after our triumph, long-range sensors picked up movement along the Sol corridor. At first we thought it was a bluff, another half measure by a council too fractured to act decisively. But when the reports piled in, the truth was undeniable. They were coming, and they were coming in force. 200 ships, drawn from half a dozen species, marching toward Earth. The Council hadn't agreed on much, but they agreed on this. Humanity's homeworld had to burn. The War Council on Earth went silent when the intelligence officer delivered the news. Men who had shouted and cursed during strategy sessions now sat pale and cold. 200 ships, more firepower than humanity had ever faced. "This is it," one admiral whispered. "They'll break us in Sol, and the rest will collapse. They'll make an example of Earth." "Then we don't let them," I said. My voice cut through the silence, harsher than I intended. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Searching for something, maybe sanity, maybe hope. I leaned forward, jaw tight. They want Earth because they think we'll defend it like they defend their homeworlds. Static lines, glorious last stands. They think we'll throw everything into protecting one planet. But Earth is more than dirt. Earth is people, and people fight differently. What are you suggesting? Not a defense, I said. An ambush. We don't meet them at Earth. We meet them before they reach it. We bleed them dry in the Kuiper Belt, in the dark where their formations mean nothing. We turn Sol itself into a trap. The plan was born in fire and desperation. Every Terran fleet was recalled. Every reserve ship, every freighter that could mount a cannon, was pressed into service. Mines were planted along likely approach vectors, stations retooled into fortresses. Even the asteroid colonies joined, their engines ignited to create mobile platforms of rock and steel. When the Council fleet entered the Sol system, they didn't find a cowering planet. They found hunters waiting in the dark. The Battle of the Kuiper Line began with silence. Our fleets drifted among the frozen rocks, power signatures low, weapons primed. The Council ships advanced in glittering formation, confident, arrogant, certain of their superiority. They thought we would break at the sight of their numbers. We broke them first. The opening salvo was a storm of torpedoes from hidden launchers, detonating in their midst before their shields could cycle. Half a dozen ships went up in fireballs before the rest even realized they were under attack. Then the asteroids came alive, engines flaring, railguns mounted on stone hurling death into their lines. The void exploded with chaos. The Resolute led the charge, tearing through the flanks like a wolf in a herd. Our guns spat fire, shredding their escorts. Smaller Terran destroyers darted in and out, striking engines, then vanishing into the belt. Every maneuver was reckless, desperate, but it worked because it was human. The Council had come expecting order. They found madness. On the bridge, the deck shook beneath every impact. Alarms shrieked, men shouted over the roar of battle. I gripped the railing, eyes locked on the tactical display. Red icons swarmed around us, too many to count. "Shields failing on Sector 3, Holt bellowed. "Reroute power, keep the guns hot," I shouted back. "We're not dying with ammunition still loaded." The Resolute dove between two alien cruisers, railguns hammering one to pieces while torpedoes gutted the other. Sparks rained from the ceiling as enemy fire tore into our hull, but still we pressed forward. Around us, the trap held. Mines detonated in brilliant blossoms of light, crippling council frigates. Human ships swarmed their carriers, Marines boarding and sabotaging from within. The void was littered with wreckage, metal carcasses drifting like gravestones. But for every alien ship destroyed, another pressed forward. Their numbers were still crushing, their weapons still devastating. Slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. The Kuiper line was painted in fire, but the Council's advance didn't stop. Our ambush had bloodied them, broken their arrogance, but it hadn't destroyed them. Their fleet pushed through the chaos, grinding toward the inner system, toward Earth itself. When the order came to fall back, it felt like a blade to the chest. We had hurt them, but they were still coming. The retreat was brutal. Ships crippled and burning limped toward Mars, toward Luna, toward Earth. The Resolute barely survived, its hull cracked, its engines sputtering, but we dragged ourselves back into orbit. From the command deck, I looked down at Earth, the cradle of humanity, blue and fragile against the black. My home. Our home. And behind me, 200 ships still advanced, fewer now, bleeding, but enough to finish the job. The Terran Defense Council met in emergency session, faces grim and haggard. Casualty reports scrolled endlessly across the screens. Thousands dead, dozens of ships gone, entire families on the asteroid colonies wiped out. "They'll be here within days," one admiral said flatly. "And this time there's no belt, no trap. Earth itself will be the battlefield." Silence hung heavy. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, steady but burning. "Then Earth will not fall quietly. If they come, they will pay for every inch of soil in blood." And so we prepared for the final defense. Every ship that could still fly was patched and armed. Every station was turned into a fortress. Orbital platforms were constructed from the wreckage of our own ships. On Earth's surface, cities became battlegrounds in waiting. Streets barricaded, skyscrapers turned into bunkers, factories retooled into armories. For the first time in centuries, humanity stood united, not as nations, but as one people staring down annihilation. The Council fleet entered orbit with thunder. Dozens of warships descended, their weapons glowing like suns, casting shadows across Earth's oceans. Their message was clear: surrender or burn. No one surrendered. The skies lit up with fire as the battle for Earth began. Orbital platforms spat railgun fire into the void, tearing holes in alien hulls. Council ships rained plasma and energy beams, scorching the atmosphere. Explosions flashed like lightning, shaking continents below. On the Resolute, patched and battered but still fighting, I stood at the helm as we dove into the fray. Enemy ships surrounded us, their fire hammering our shields, but every shot we fired ripped through their arrogance. The comms were a storm of chaos. "Station Alpha destroyed. Luna base holding. Enemy boarding parties on Mars." And through it all, I heard the voices of my crew shouting, bleeding, refusing to break. At one point, Holt turned to me, blood streaking his temple. "Commander, we can't hold this line much longer." I stared at the tactical display. Earth below, alien ships above, the void between filled with fire and death. And then I made the choice. "Then we don't hold it," I said. "We break them." I ordered the fleet to converge, not to defend, but to strike, to tear into the Council ships with everything left, no matter the cost. It was madness. It was suicide. And it worked. Human ships rammed cruisers, detonated cores point blank, dragged alien vessels into the atmosphere to burn in re-entry. The sky above Earth turned into a graveyard of fire. The Council fleet reeled. Their numbers were still greater, but their will cracked. They had expected submission, not fury. They had expected defeat, not sacrifice. By the time the battle ended, Earth still stood, burned, scarred, but alive. The Council's fleet limped away, crippled, their pride in ruins. We had not just defended Earth, we had bloodied their armada and proven to every watching eye that humanity would not be erased. As I stood on the bridge, staring down at the battered planet below, I felt no triumph. Only resolve. "This isn't the end," Holt said quietly beside me. "No," I agreed, my fists clenched against the railing. "This is only the beginning. They came to break us. Instead, we've shown them humanity doesn't break." And as the smoke cleared, I knew the Council had just made its greatest mistake. By marching to Earth, they had united us in a way no insult ever could. Now, it was not about survival. It was about vengeance. The smoke had barely cleared above Earth when vengeance began to take shape. The Council had come with 200 ships. Their combined might meant to crush us, to leave Earth as ash and its people as a memory. They left with half their fleet shattered, their arrogance burned away, and their unity bleeding in the dark. But Earth still stood, and Earth was angry. Factories that had once strained to supply a defense now thundered with new purpose. Entire cities were rebuilt, not for comfort, but for war. Every wrecked ship from the battle was stripped for salvage, reforged into weapons. The young who had once feared conscription now volunteered in droves. Humanity had stared down annihilation and found in it a hunger. The War Council convened in the ruins of Geneva, the city half burned from orbital bombardment but chosen as a symbol. We would meet not in comfort, but in scars. The room was dim, lit only by screens displaying reports from across Seoul. Faces were grim, tired, but no longer afraid. "This war has changed," I said, my voice carrying through the chamber. "We've defended, we've survived. But survival isn't enough." "Not anymore." The others listened in silence as I leaned forward. "The Council brought war to our home. They failed to break us. Now we take the war to theirs. No more waiting, no more reacting. We strike them where it hurts, where they believe themselves untouchable." There was hesitation at first, talk of risk, of resources stretched thin. But beneath it all burned the same fire that had carried us through the Kuiper Line. Rage, pride, defiance. Operation Iron Veil was born. The target wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. A Council shipyard at Telros Prime, where fleets for half their member species were constructed. A massive orbital facility, spanning kilometers, defended by automated guns, patrols, and garrisons. To destroy it would cripple their ability to replace losses. To destroy it would humiliate them further. To destroy it would prove that humanity wasn't merely surviving. We were conquering. The preparations were relentless. Fleets rebuilt, crews retrained, new weapons tested. Where alien ships relied on sleek energy weapons, we perfected brutal simplicity. Kinetic slugs that could punch through shields. Warheads designed not to disable, but to obliterate. Suicide drones cobbled from old freighters, engines overloaded with explosives, guided by volunteers who knew they wouldn't return. Every weapon was built on the same truth. Humans didn't fight clean, and we didn't fight fair. As the fleet assembled, I stood once more aboard the Resolute, its scars patched but still visible. The crew was hardened now, no longer recruits pretending at courage. They were killers, forged in fire, their eyes hollow with loss but burning with fury. Holt approached, his face lined with exhaustion, his voice low. "We've won battles, Commander, but this is different. Telros Prime isn't a convoy or a listening post. It's their pride, their heart." "Good," I said. "That's exactly why it needs to burn." When we jumped into enemy space, the silence on the bridge was suffocating. Dozens of human ships emerged from the void, their hulls dark, weapons primed. Before us, Telros Prime hung in orbit, a fortress of steel and arrogance. Its lights glimmered like stars, its defense grid already stirring at our arrival. "Enemy patrols detecting us?" the tactical officer barked. "Then let's announce ourselves," I replied. The first volley came from the Resolute. Railguns thundered, launching slugs that tore through patrol ships before they could even raise shields. Torpedoes streaked out, blossoms of fire consuming smaller escorts. The battle began in a storm of chaos. But this time, chaos was ours to command. Human ships moved like predators, darting through defenses, exploiting gaps, hammering the station's weak points. Suicide drones plunged into its flanks, detonating in shattering explosions that ripped through the outer rings. Automated guns turned to fire, but every volley only bought us more time to dig deeper. On the bridge, the deck shook violently as return fire hammered us. Sparks rained, alarms screamed, the hull groaned. Still, we pressed on. "Station shields weakening," Holt shouted, clinging to his console. "Keep firing," I roared. "Don't give them a breath." We closed the distance, our ships clawing their way through defenses with reckless fury. Human Marines launched boarding pods, slamming into the station's hull. Inside, the fighting was vicious. Close quarters, brutal, no mercy. Reports came in of corridors choked with smoke, of Arcari defenders slaughtered room by room. Hours bled away in fire and steel, and then finally the call came through. "Command core secured. Charges set." I exhaled, the first breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Detonate," I ordered. The explosion was cataclysmic. The heart of Telros Prime erupted, tearing through the station like a star being born. Fire swallowed its rings, debris scattered across orbit, ships caught in the blast shredded instantly. The shipyard, the pride of the Council, was gone. The silence on the bridge lasted only a moment before the crew erupted into cheers. Men who had once doubted humanity's survival now roared in triumph. I didn't cheer. I only stared at the wreckage, knowing what would come next. Because vengeance is never one-sided. News of Telros Prime's destruction spread across the galaxy like wildfire. To us, it was victory. To the Council, it was unforgivable insult. The cracks in their unity deepened, blame hurled between species, accusations of incompetence and betrayal. But beneath the bickering was something worse: fear. For centuries, the Council had ruled by dominance, by the illusion of invulnerability. That illusion was shattered. Humanity had not only survived, it had burned their pride to ash. And yet, even as their voices fractured, their fleets grew darker. They weren't going to sue for peace. They weren't going to retreat. They were going to come harder, faster, with more fury than ever before. I saw it in the intercepted transmissions, the desperate orders, the frantic mobilizations. The Council wasn't just preparing to fight, they were preparing to annihilate. Back aboard the Resolute, Holt joined me at the viewport, staring at the drifting remains of Telros Prime. His voice was heavy, almost a growl. "We've won, Commander, but at what cost? They won't stop now. They'll pour everything they have into this war, and will bleed for every inch." I turned to him, my jaw set. "Then let them come. We'll bleed, yes, but so will they. And the difference is this: humans know how to fight through blood. They've forgotten." He studied me for a moment, then gave a grim nod. And in that silence, I knew what came next. The war was no longer about recognition. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't even about survival. It was about vengeance, and vengeance demanded blood. As we turned back toward Sul, leaving Telros Prime a burning carcass behind us, I could already feel the galaxy shifting. The Council had wanted to make an example of Earth. Instead, we had made an example of them. And now every species in the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity had marched to war, and we weren't stopping until the stars themselves trembled. The wreckage of Telros Prime had barely cooled before the galaxy shifted. To us, it was triumph. Proof that humanity could not only defend but strike, tear down the pride of the Council, and leave it in flames. To the Council, it was sacrilege. A humiliation so deep that no debate, no diplomacy, no compromise could cover the wound. And so, for the first time in centuries, the Council spoke with one voice, not out of unity, but out of desperation. Humanity would be erased. The intelligence reports were clearer than ever. Fleets from half the galaxy were moving, not scattered patrols, not fractured squadrons, but entire armadas. Every species with a grudge or a fear was pouring ships into the Council's war machine. This wasn't another raid or reprisal. It was extermination. The message was simple. Earth would not just be destroyed. Humanity would be purged from history. I sat in the War Council chamber beneath Geneva, surrounded by generals and admirals whose faces were carved with exhaustion. The air stank of sweat, smoke, and desperation. For weeks we had celebrated Telros Prime. Now we were staring at our own funeral. 500 ships, an admiral muttered, his voice hollow. At least, more joining by the day. Their largest offensive in centuries. They'll throw everything they have at Sol, and this time we won't stop them. Silence followed. Not a single man argued. We all knew the truth. Numbers didn't lie, and in numbers alone, humanity was finished. Unless... I leaned forward, fists tight against the table. Then we don't fight their war. Eyes turned, some hopeful, others weary. They expect us to defend Earth again, I continued. They'll come in force, in formation, in the same arrogance that's carried them for centuries. We can't match their numbers, but we can shatter their unity. That's where we win. How? A general demanded. Their unity may be fragile, but right now it's iron. They're united in hatred, united in fear of us. Fear, I said sharply, is a blade with two edges. We've already cut them once. We can do it again. The plan was madness. It had to be. But madness was our strength. We didn't need allies, not official ones. The smaller species had no love for humanity, but neither did they love the Council. Centuries of being bullied, taxed, and conscripted had left scars. They feared open rebellion, but they feared extinction more. If we could bleed the Council badly enough, if we could show them humanity wasn't alone in its defiance, cracks would become fractures, and fractures would collapse the entire machine. We began reaching out, not with offers of friendship, but with promises of blood. Smugglers carried messages through the void. Infiltrators whispered in back rooms. Our words were simple. The Council cannot protect you. Join them, and you'll die in their wars. Stand aside, and humanity will break them for you. Some ignored us, others laughed, but a few listened. The Drakari, a minor species enslaved by the Arkari, smuggled us intel on supply routes. The Valen, merchants strangled by Council tariffs, began feeding us fuel in secret. Even whispers from the Altheri fringes suggested not all their commanders were eager to throw their fleets into Earth's fire. It wasn't alliance. It wasn't loyalty, but it was enough. Enough to sow doubt. Enough to make the Council look over its shoulder while we struck its heart. Back aboard the Resolute, I gathered the crew. The ship had been rebuilt again, its scars layered with new steel, its weapons refitted for slaughter. The men and women before me were gaunt with fatigue, hollow-eyed from months of endless war. But when I looked at them, I saw the same fire. This isn't survival anymore, I told them. This is vengeance. The Council thinks it can crush us with numbers. Let them try. We'll bleed them until their numbers mean nothing. Their roar shook the deck. The campaign that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. We didn't defend. We attacked. Not just ships, but their lifelines. We hit their fuel convoys, their food shipments, their communications hubs. We raided colonies, stripped stations, left entire sectors in silence. Human fleets moved like wolves through their space, striking and vanishing before the Council could react. The Resolute led one such raid deep into Arcari territory. We dropped out of warp in the shadow of a gas giant, where a convoy of supply ships crawled under light escort. The battle lasted minutes. By the time it ended, the convoy was ash, the escorts gutted, and the wreckage drifted like bones in the dark. The crew cheered, but I saw the truth. For every convoy we burned, the Council sent 3 more. For every fleet we crippled, 2 more appeared. Their resources dwarfed ours. Their numbers pressed harder every day, but numbers alone don't win wars. The cracks were spreading. Council transmissions grew frantic, filled with accusations. Commanders demanded reinforcements that never came. Smaller species dragged their feet, their fleets arriving late or not at all. Fear was eating them alive, and humanity's shadow loomed larger with every strike. Still, the hammer was coming. The Council Armada gathered on the fringes of Sol, its mass impossible to deny. 500 ships, maybe more, ready to finish what they had started. We didn't wait for them to strike. Operation Silent Fang was launched in desperation and fury. Our fleets, battered and outnumbered, would meet them head-on, not in Earth's orbit, but in the cold expanse between stars. Not to win, but to cripple. To make their unity collapse before it reached our home. As the Resolute prepared for the jump, I walked the lower decks one last time. Marines strapped on armor, their faces calm. Resigned. Engineers kissed family photos before vanishing into engine bays. No one asked if we would survive. They all knew the answer. Holt met me at the hangar, his voice low. "Commander, if this fails..." I cut him off. "If this fails, humanity burns. But if it works, Holt, if it works, the Council tears itself apart." He gave me a grim smile. "Then let's make sure it works." We jumped into hell. The Council Armada filled the void, a wall of steel and fire stretching across the stars. Their ships gleamed with power, weapons glowing, shields blazing. Against them, our fleet looked like ants before giants. But ants can still bite. The Resolute led the charge. Railguns thundered, torpedoes roared, smaller destroyers darting into the gaps. Suicide drones streaked into their lines, detonating in blinding flashes. The void erupted in chaos, Council formations collapsing under the storm. They hit back harder. Plasma fire shredded human ships by the dozens. Entire wings erased in seconds. The comms were a storm of screams and static. Still, we pressed forward. On the bridge, Holt shouted over the chaos, "Commander, we're being surrounded." "Good," I snarled. "Let them close in. The tighter they press, the more we bleed them." And bleed them we did. For every Terran ship lost, 3 Council ships fell. For every volley we endured, we tore holes in their pride. The void became a graveyard, wreckage drifting, flames casting shadows across stars. But the cost was unbearable. Ship after ship vanished from the board, names of men and women I had known blinking into silence. The Resolute itself groaned under fire, its hull cracking, its shields flickering. We had lit the Armada on fire, but the fire was consuming us too. When the order finally came to retreat, it wasn't out of fear, it was out of necessity. Humanity had struck with everything it had. And lived. Barely. The Council Armada was broken, not destroyed, but fractured. Their unity cracked wider than ever. Commanders bickered, fleets scattered, and whispers of dissent grew into shouts. We had survived again, and survival, once more, was victory. As the Resolute limped back toward Sol, engines sputtering, I stood at the viewport, staring into the void littered with wreckage. Holt joined me, his voice quiet. "We've bled them, Commander, but we've bled ourselves dry in the process." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Yes, but we're still alive. And as long as humanity breathes, the Council will never know peace again. Because this wasn't just war anymore, it was a reckoning. And the galaxy was far from finished burning. The Battle of Silent Fang left scars on both sides. For us, the scars were carved into steel and flesh. Half our fleet destroyed, thousands dead, Earth's reserves drained to ash. The Resolute limped home with holes in her hull and ghosts in her corridors. We'd survived, but survival came at a cost we could no longer ignore. For the Council, the scars were deeper, because they were not just in steel, but in trust. Reports came in faster than we could process. Council fleets bickering, their commanders refusing orders, accusations of betrayal whispered across the galaxy. The Arcari blamed the Altheri for pulling their ships too soon. The Altheri blamed the Cathari for leaving flanks exposed. Smaller species muttered that their lives were being wasted for the pride of giants. Silent Fang hadn't destroyed them. It had done something better. It had broken their illusion of unity. I stood in the War Council chamber beneath Geneva once again, staring at hollows of intercepted transmissions. Alien voices shouted over one another, translated into jagged English that barely captured the venom. "They're eating each other alive," one of our intelligence officers said. "The cracks are widening. We've even picked up reports of outright mutiny in some sectors." Good. That was the word burning on my tongue. But another voice cut through the room, low and sharp. Admiral Harrow, one of the oldest men in the Terran fleet. "Cracks are not collapse. Don't fool yourselves. They still outnumber us 10-1. And if they ever remember how to fight like us instead of like bureaucrats, we'll be ash before the year ends." The room went silent. Harrow was right. Fractures meant nothing if the Council managed to plaster them over with rage. That was when I spoke. My voice was steady, but it carried the fire that had been burning since the first insult in that chamber of arrogance. "Then we don't let them heal," I said. "We break them further. We drive the wedge so deep they'll never pull it out. This isn't about surviving their fleets anymore. This is about tearing their alliance apart until the Council ceases to exist." The plan was brutal. We wouldn't just attack their ships. We would attack their trust. Our intelligence networks went to work, spreading lies and truths in equal measure. Intercepted Council orders were doctored and broadcast to alien fleets, making it seem as if their allies had abandoned them. Supply convoys were hit with precision, leaving behind wreckage designed to implicate rival species. Assassins moved through the dark, striking not at soldiers, but at politicians and envoys who still tried to hold the alliance together. The galaxy became a theater of betrayal, and humanity pulled the strings. Back aboard the Resolute, I watched the reports with grim satisfaction. The Arcari pulled fleets back from the front, snarling that they wouldn't bleed for Altheri incompetence. The Altheri retaliated by cutting off supply shipments to Arcari colonies. The Cathari, paranoid and proud, began fortifying their own borders instead of reinforcing the Council armada. Smaller species, already stretched thin, deserted altogether. It was working. But war is never clean, and vengeance never simple. For every crack we widened, blood spilled. Civilian transports burned, colonies starved, innocent lives erased in the storm of manipulation. Some on Earth whispered that we had become as monstrous as the Council we fought. Maybe they were right. But monsters survive. And humanity wasn't fighting for morality. We were fighting for existence. Still, the fractures weren't enough. Not yet. The Council had bled, but it hadn't collapsed. It still had fleets, still had numbers, still had the ability to turn its wrath on Earth if it ever unified again. We needed a death blow. That was when intelligence brought us the opportunity. A secret summit. The Council, desperate to salvage what was left of their unity, had arranged a clandestine meeting of their highest commanders, not in their glittering capital, but in a hidden station on the fringe of neutral space. There, they would try to patch their wounds, to rally their fleets, to turn their fractured voices back into one. If they succeeded, the war was lost. If we struck them there, if we killed their leaders, humanity wouldn't just wound the Council, it would decapitate it. The War Council in Geneva erupted with arguments when the intel was revealed. Some called it suicide, others called it impossible. But I didn't see impossibility. I saw inevitability. "We've bled for years," I said, slamming my fist onto the table. "We've buried thousands. And for what? To keep surviving until they finally crush us? No. This is our chance. We don't just fight them. We end them." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Then, slowly, grim nods spread. The decision was made. Operation Black Ash. The Resolute would lead a strike fleet through the void, deep into enemy space, to the hidden station where the Council's commanders planned to gather. It would be no ordinary battle. It would be assassination. A blade to the throat of the galaxy. As the fleet prepared, I walked the decks of the Resolute one last time. The crew was quieter now. No cheers, no bravado. They knew what this mission meant. It wasn't about survival. It was about legacy, about ensuring humanity's place in history, even if every one of us died to carve it. Holt met me on the bridge before departure. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "Commander, if we do this, there's no going back. Even if we win, humanity will never be forgiven. We'll be feared, hated, hunted forever." "Good," I said. "Fear keeps us alive. Let them hate us. Let them whisper our name like a curse. As long as humanity exists, I don't care what they call us." He stared at me for a moment, then gave a grim smile. "Then let's write the ending they'll never forget." The fleet jumped into the void, silence hanging heavier than steel. We moved like ghosts, silent and hidden, past patrols, past beacons, through the cracks in the Council's once perfect net. Our allies in the shadows, smugglers, rebels, species too small to matter, cleared the way, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. Humanity had become a storm, and no one wanted to stand in its path. When the station finally came into view, it gleamed against the black like a jewel, massive, fortified, surrounded by ships on guard. Inside were the commanders who had sworn to erase Earth. Inside were the voices that had once laughed at us in their council chamber. Inside was our chance to end them. I stood at the viewport, staring at the station as the fleet prepared. My fists clenched, my jaw set. This was it. Years of blood and fire, of humiliation and vengeance, all narrowing to this one moment. "They thought humanity would kneel," I muttered. "Let's show them how wrong they were." The order went out. The Resolute roared into fire. The station hung in the void like a crown of steel. It wasn't the largest outpost I had ever seen, but its significance dwarfed any capital, any fleet, any colony. Inside those walls, the Council's commanders were gathering, the same voices that had laughed at humanity's plea for recognition, the same mouths that had demanded our extinction. And if we succeeded tonight, those voices would never be heard again. The Resolute drifted in the shadow of the strike fleet, our hull blackened, our power signatures masked. Around us, destroyers and cruisers waited, engines on silent burn, weapons primed. The void itself seemed to hold its breath. On the bridge, the air was suffocating. Men checked weapons, officers muttered coordinates, Holt stood at my side with his jaw clenched. No one smiled. No one cheered. This wasn't a battle for glory. It was an execution. I stared at the tactical display, the station at its center ringed with patrols. Beyond them, the galaxy spun, cold and uncaring. "This is it," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Every insult, every death, every drop of blood has brought us here. Tonight we cut the head off the Council. Tonight, humanity writes its name in fire." The crew answered not with cheers, but with a silence that burned hotter than any roar. The first strike came from our hidden mines, detonating along the station's outer patrol routes. Alien ships erupted in fire before they even realized we were there. A split second later, our fleet roared forward, guns blazing, torpedoes streaking through the dark. The void exploded. The Resolute tore into their lines, railguns hammering, slugs ripping through shields, detonations lighting the black like a storm of suns. Their patrols scrambled, but they were caught off guard, fractured, and we were wolves among sheep. "Push through!" I barked. "The station is the target, nothing else matters." We carved a path through fire, our ships burning behind us, the void littered with wreckage. Council vessels closed in, larger, stronger, but too slow, too arrogant, too used to fighting by rules that no longer existed. The Resolute took hit after hit, the hull screaming, alarms wailing, but still we pressed on. Holt's voice roared over the chaos. "Shields at 20%! Hold them!" I shouted back. "We need to reach the station." And we did. Dropships screamed from our bays, plunging through the chaos toward the station's docking rings. Marines packed inside, faces hard, weapons clenched. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to end it. I was with them. The docking clamp slammed, the air hissed, and we stormed through the breach like a tide of steel, the corridors of the station filled with fire. Alien defenders fell back step by step, their weapons flashing, their voices shrieking. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. The walls shook with explosions. Smoke choked the air. The dead littered the ground. But we pushed forward, carving our way toward the command chamber. Every corner was blood. Every step was vengeance. At one junction, a squad of Altheri tried to hold the line, their elegant armor gleaming. I led the charge myself, rail rifle hammering, Holt at my side with a blade in hand. We cut them down in brutal silence. No speeches, no hesitation. Just death. When we finally reached the chamber doors, half our force was gone. Marines bled against the walls, their armor cracked, their eyes empty. But those still standing didn't waver. "This is it," I said, voice hoarse but burning. "No matter what happens, those bastards die tonight." We blew the doors. The chamber inside was vast, lit by holograms of stars and maps. The Council's commanders clustered around a grand table. Arkari, Altheri, Cathari, and more, the architects of our near extinction. They froze as we stormed in, weapons raised, eyes wide, not with fear, but with disbelief. Humans weren't supposed to be here. And then disbelief turned to rage. Guards rushed forward, weapons firing, but they were cut down in the storm of our assault. Marines fanned out, hammering suppressive fire, grenades shattering the chamber. I surged forward, weapon blazing, eyes locked on the Council's leaders. The speaker himself stood at the table's head, his form of light shifting, his voice booming across the chamber. "You dare? You dare defile this council with your savagery?" I raised my rifle and fired. The speaker's form shattered in a burst of brilliance, dissolving into sparks. The chamber descended into chaos. Council leaders shrieked orders, some pulling weapons themselves, others cowering. But there was no escape. My men tore through them, bullets and blades ending centuries of arrogance in minutes. I cut down an Altheri commander myself, his feathers stained with his own blood. Holt gutted an Arcari with a combat knife, his face a mask of fury. The room became a slaughterhouse, the galaxy's most powerful figures dying like animals in a pen. When the smoke cleared, the table was drenched in blood. The council was dead. Silence fell. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the few Marines who remained, their armor scorched, their weapons smoking. I stood at the center of the chamber, staring at the carnage, my chest heaving. It was over. The council was gone. But victory never comes without a price. Alarms screamed across the station. Enemy reinforcements were flooding in, entire fleets converging. The Resolute was still fighting outside, but it wouldn't last. We wouldn't last. Holt staggered to my side, blood running down his face. "Commander, we did it, but we'll never get out." I nodded slowly. The truth heavy as steel. Then we make sure they never forget. We planted charges across the chamber, across the station's core. The Marines moved with grim purpose, no hesitation. They knew they weren't coming home. They didn't care. When the last charge was set, I looked once more at the table where the galaxy had once ruled. I thought of Earth, of the insults, of the deaths, of the fire, and I whispered, "This is humanity's answer." The charges blew. The station erupted in a cataclysm that lit the void like a newborn star. The council's leaders, their fleets, their pride, all consumed in one final blaze. The Resolute never made it out. None of us did. But our sacrifice was not in vain. Because when the smoke cleared, the galaxy was leaderless. The council was gone. Its fleets scattered, its species bickering, its power shattered. What had once been an empire of arrogance was now a carcass, torn apart by its own pride and humanity's fury. And Earth still stood. Back on our homeworld, when news of the strike reached the people, there was no cheering, no celebration, only silence. A silence that spoke louder than any roar. Humanity had survived. Humanity had avenged. And humanity had taken its place among the stars. Not as equals, not as allies, but as predators. The galaxy would never forget the night the council fell. They had laughed at us. They had mocked us. They had tried to erase us. And humanity's answer was written in blood.